Welcome to North of 60. I'm Heidi Schweighofer. Today, my guest is Nathan Jarosz. Nathan is running for state representative in District 34, succeeding Casey Weinstein, who is running for Senate. So I'll be interested to have you get to know Nathan a little bit. Nathan, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate being here.
I'm glad, and I want you to tell me about yourself.
Yeah, so my background is in leadership development. So in my youth, I'm an Eagle Scout, was able to travel across the nation doing leadership programs for youth and adults from the Florida Keys to the San Francisco Bay Area and many places in between. I also was able to train leadership skills internationally, working with Chinese students in China for a month, as well as—
fascinating.
Oh, thank you, yes. And then I also run a nonprofit organization I founded called LIGHT, that stands for Leadership Influencing Teen Empowerment, that provides leadership development, emotional intelligence training to high schoolers and middle schoolers for the past about 6.5 years.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Why are you running?
See, I'm running to bring servant leadership to Ohio State House.
What does that mean?
Yeah, so servant leadership is about adding value to the lives of other people. It sort of goes away from the older styles of leadership, which is more of like the big boss leader, where it's one leader telling others what to do, think they know all the answers, whereas servant leadership is more about side-by-side leadership. I know a lot of politicians often think that and strive to be the smartest person in the room, whereas I try to surround myself with the smartest people, because I know that the power that we have comes from the community. It's not so much who I am as a state representative, it's about who I represent.
That is a very refreshing stance.
Thank you.
It truly is. People have mentioned that you're a young man, and I'm very glad that you're doing this, Nathan. Tell me a little bit about you don't have to tell me your age, but
well, that's okay. My age is a fact, right? And I am 29 years old.
Oh, I think that's wonderful.
Well, thank you. And I believe that it's very important for younger people to step up and take ownership of the challenges that our community and our country face. And I also know that even with age being a kind of discussion point, there are 3 prominent Ohio leaders who were younger than I am when they were first elected to the State House. There was Congresswoman Amelia Sykes. She was 28 years old when first elected to the State House. Then Tim Ryan was 27 years old when elected to the State Senate, and then 29 when elected to Congress. And then there was one other person who was elected right out of college at the young age of 22 years old.
Oh my word!
And that was Senator Sherrod Brown. So when I see the history of some of the most prominent Ohio leaders that have been in our country, or that have been in our state, excuse me, that I'm proud to be taking the next step toward our future.
I am too. Good for you.
Thank you.
I really am proud of you for stepping up and taking this on. It's a lot of work, I would imagine.
Yeah, it is a lot of work, but I've been enjoying having the conversations with the community. I've door knocked before for other campaigns and other topics just in the community, and I didn't know how it would be as a candidate this time, but I've really enjoyed just being able to really have these interesting discussions. I mean, hearing what's important to the community, how best I could serve them, and just looking forward to keeping that going through this entire election and as a state representative.
Good, good. Yeah. Let's go through a few of the things. You talked about LIGHT.
Yes.
It's a nonprofit.
Correct.
You created it in 2017, I believe?
That's correct, yes.
Talk about that.
Yeah, so I used to work for another nonprofit organization that did a lot of work with youth in schools with risky choice behavior. And I saw that as I was working with different students that instead of looking at maybe some of the challenges that they face and what not to do, well, what could they do? How could they take on these different skills that would change their lives? And I saw how these different leadership programs I was a part of across the nation, where leadership opportunities gravitated to people who participated in those. And was it because they were just naturally gifted? Not really. Just that they had that opportunity to learn how to lead themselves, how to work in a team, and how to identify ethical and effective leadership. And I noticed that there was a lot of disparities because sometimes leadership programs are made available to people who may have the highest grades, or 1 or 2 students from each school.
Yes.
And the rest get left behind.
Yes.
And I just thought, well,
absolutely true.
What if we had a way of reaching them where they're at in school, just like you learn math, science, history, or any other subject, What if we had more of an emphasis on these higher educational leadership skills so that people can become more empowered? Because it doesn't matter what career you go into, whether you are in a trade, whether you are going to a specific technical degree, whether you're in the military, these leadership skills apply in any situation. So then when we are able to equip more people with these skills, that helps them in their personal life, their professional life, and in the community.
For the rest of their life.
Absolutely.
So do you go into the schools and how do you select the students, and how do you, is it a class then that you set up?
So actually, they're standard classes. So sometimes, like in the Akron Public Schools, we'll work in their freshman seminar. I've also been in health classes, family consumer science classes. Some schools like Green High School, where they have a life skills and success class. And so we'll go into the classroom, so any student who shows up to class gets the opportunity. Doesn't matter what their income is, doesn't matter what their grades are, their performance, that if they show up, they get the opportunity. And that's where we know that we can't just give somebody success, but we can find ways to give more equal opportunity. And so we'll work with teachers, work with schools on how best to find the right classes, the right timing. Sometimes a school might bring us in once, other times a school might bring us in 6 or more days working with their students on a variety of different topics. And we range from purpose, communication skills, team development, finding solutions, emotional intelligence, behavioral diversity, creative thinking, even ethics and conflict management, leadership styles. So just a variety of different topics that help hone someone's personal abilities to influence other people and make a difference in their community.
How did you get the idea? How did this whole thing come up? You just felt that it was needed for teens when you observed other leadership styles and other leadership ways of doing things.
Well, I always believe that I was very blessed and fortunate in my life to be exposed to these leadership skills. I saw how they changed my life and how they changed the lives of others I worked with. And I just thought that I alone am not going to solve all the problems in the world, right? No one will be, right? And if anyone makes that promise, they're full of it, right? But when you empower other people to be the best versions of themselves, maybe it's that high school kid from Hudson High School that gets the idea to help come up with a solution to the environment or a challenge with pollution. Maybe it's the student from North High School who comes up with an innovation that changes the way we see the world. And so when we're able to empower other people to be their best versions of themselves, that's what makes a stronger community. And that's where we look at leadership being about creating other leaders, empowering other people. And it's not so much about any one of us individually, but rather how we work together to make life better.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Very, very cool. I imagine the feedback is good, I would think.
Oh, it's been very positive. I know one teacher, we did a communication session with them, and one thing he said after the class, where we had all the students do some public speaking activities, trying to have them not say or and try to project their voice.
Or use the word like every 2 seconds.
Exactly.
Yes.
And so when we had that exercise, they all get to participate with it. And the one teacher said that there was a girl in the front row, and he didn't even know what her voice sounded like until today, because she would never speak up in class. And here she was participating in this session.
That must have made you feel great,
It
and
did,
must
yes.
have made that teacher and that student feel like, now I can talk.
Exactly.
Oh, I think that's wonderful.
Yes.
I really do.
Well, thank you.
You also then, aside from that, I know that I read on your website that you do leadership courses for youth and adults.
Correct.
Tell me a little bit about that, Nathan.
Yeah, so I've done training for businesses, organizations, youth and adults. And what's interesting is normally when I train adults, the common thing you hear is, well, I wish I would have learned this when I was younger. And that kind of helps reinforce the nonprofit angle on just seeing it that if we are able to get these skills to people earlier, they're able to use them throughout their life and through their professional goals and personal lives as well. And so when I look at why I believe leadership training is so important is because I believe that leadership is a universal skill.
Yep.
And that means two things. One is anybody can learn it, because all the skills that make up a quality leader can be improved with the right practice, experience, and opportunity. But it's also universal because it doesn't matter what you're doing. I've trained leadership skills in Florida where we were doing sailing activities with applying leadership to the to the program. Like, how do you apply leadership to sailing?
No kidding.
Absolutely, yeah, it was a great opportunity.
Yeah.
And I even was in, when I was in California, it was half the course was Californian students, half of it were Chinese students, and the activities were based in STEM. So that's science, technology, engineering, mathematics. And I remember before that program, there was the one course director who reached out to me, wanted to be included. And I told her, I said, I don't know if I'm your guy here, because I'm not a science I'm not into the technology side of it. I'm not that great at it. Are you sure you want me? And she told me, well, you have the leadership. The rest will come easily. Don't worry about it.
Whoa.
And sure enough, we were doing 3D printing, little robotics, little drone activities, all this fun things going on. And it didn't matter what the technical skill was. It mattered how we applied our ability to work with other people, our ability to learn new skills, and find common ground to accomplish a common vision. And that's what I see in our government currently, which is a major lack of this leadership approach. Oh, so whether it's on a boat, whether it's almost like a Dr. Seuss book, whether I'm on a boat, whether it's with a robot, whatever it might be, that here in our government, we need that servant leadership now more than ever, because we keep getting more and more divided, more and more extreme, and we keep broadening.
And further away from what people want.
Exactly. And with my nonprofit, I work with Democrats, Republicans, and everyone in between. Because in the community, we don't see D's and R's. We just see a common purpose, a common vision, and we work toward that goal together. And it's unfortunate that we're in a political climate where we don't want someone to get the credit because they're a D or an R, or that we don't want to make progress because if it's not exactly our way, or who's winning and who's losing, when the reality should be the people need to be winning, and we need to have leaders and representatives who don't care about whether it's a Democrat or Republican getting the benefit.
It's what the
all of us.
Process is and how to fix it together.
Right.
Amen, Bud.
Thank you.
Tell me, I know you refer to yourself as a political organizer as well. What is important to you politically? Your servant leadership certainly sounds like the basis of everything you're doing. What else is, Nathan?
Well, I think one of the main things is that I feel that oftentimes we are so reactive in our government, whereas we need to be much more proactive when we look at some of the problems and the way we behave in our political system by engaging more people. So, for example, making sure that we emphasize more on listening and emphasizing the concerns of the community. So like when I've been knocking doors and engaged with the community, a lot of issues pop up. I mean, education is a major issue that people are wanting to protect and prioritize because they want their kids and their grandkids to have the opportunities that maybe they had, or even meet the needs of the current day, the current moment. And even things like the environment or going into public safety are all essential things that play into not just politically, but through our community. And so organizing is just making sure that people are aware of what's going on and how they can be involved in this process, because in the end, this is our government. It's not just sending someone off and hoping that they fix it all by themselves. It's about doing it together.
It doesn't feel like that right now necessarily in the state, does it?
Correct. It does not, and that's where it's trying to lead that change. And instead of complaining about the situation that we're in, I'm very strongly passionate about being that change that I seek. Good,
good, good. I saw you were awarded, it's called the 30 for the Future. That is very prestigious. Yeah. Who awards that? How was that a surprise?
Well, that was through the Greater Akron Chamber of Commerce. And so, this Akron is basically encompasses all of Summit County. Yep. And so, but when you're involved in the community, you meet a lot of great people. You are very active on seeing the challenge that the community faces. So I work with the Chamber of Commerce, work with other organizations in the community. And essentially, it's just an award for people under the age of 40 who've been very involved or innovative in this environment. And I thought it was interesting, too, because Casey Weinstein, our current state representative, won the award back in 2018 when he was a city council member in Hudson, and he was running for state representative that same year. And so I think it's very neat to see. It might be fate, yes. And so great to be following in those footsteps of young leaders taking this moment and rising to the challenge.
Good for you.
Thank you.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
That's quite a thing. I want to go through a couple of your issues that, as they appear again on your website. There's a few that I want to talk about a little bit more in more detail, but If you don't mind, I just want to sort of go through the list.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go ahead.
Education, especially, thank heavens, public schools. Talk about that.
Correct. So I think some of the main things that we look at with public education is the school voucher program that has been really defunding our public schools.
Yep.
Taking money away from the public and where the majority of students attend and giving it to more private interests. And I think that's a major challenge when there are limited resources. And we want to make sure that those in the public schools have the funding they need to be able to offer the services that are essential. In addition to education, we look at protecting teachers and educators to teach what they believe is right for their students. We saw threats to banning diversity, equity, and inclusion learning outcomes. And I know sometimes diversity, inclusion, equity may sound scary to some people, but in the end, diversity is simply the differences among people. Those differences can be physical, ideological, or behavioral. The way we look, act, behave, and all of that is an opportunity for creativity, a different perspective, but we have to learn how to work with those differences to be more effective. And I think when we're trying to ban and prohibit these learning outcomes, what we're essentially doing is we're trying to stop people from thinking. And that's one of the most dangerous things that can happen, is that it's okay if we disagree, but how can we disagree in a constructive way? How can we disagree and find maybe I disagree with 8 things, but if there's 2 things we agree with, or maybe there's some commonalities, how do we find that way of disagreeing in the right way? And when we are seeing the threats to education of being able to learn about these skills, I see that as a major threat to our freedoms and to where we want to go as a society.
I have been appalled at what I see in Florida.
Right.
The banning of books that to me are classics that I grew up with, the banning of classes because they're considered woke, whatever that is.
Right.
I am so frightened by that. I cannot imagine raising my daughter in a school system where she's not allowed to read what she wants to read or learn about things that maybe I'm not that comfortable with, but it's school. That's what she should be learning. She should be making up her mind. I'm very, very glad to hear you talk about public schools, because especially here in Hudson, we have a wonderful school system. It's absolutely excellent. And I think people don't like paying the levy. I do. I want to continue to have those schools be the best they can be. So good for you.
Thank you.
What are you thinking about with the environment? That's a word that a lot of people think, oh, the environment.
Yeah, well, I know, like in my background as an Eagle Scout, we were very active in the wilderness and being able to learn that concept like leave no trace. Right, that was a thing where you want to leave your environment better than you left it. And that's whether you go to somebody's house, right? You don't just make a mess and walk away, right? You want to make sure that you are courteous when you are in someone else's home. And so we see the same thing with our environment. And so we want to make sure that we are thinking more about how do we reduce pollution in air and make sure our water is clean. Because it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican.
Nope.
If the water comes out brown because of lead, that's a problem. If the air is with smog, that's a problem. And so we need to make sure that we are finding ways to promote like renewable energy, which is going to create a lot of great more jobs in the environmental field too. Because I think sometimes people have the problem thinking that if you're pro-environment, you are anti-job.
Yes.
When they actually go hand in hand.
That's right.
To move us toward the next step in our future as a community and as a country. And so we look at with the environment. I know there was a phrase I remember hearing a long time ago when I was on a leadership course in West Virginia. And it was this Indian proverb that said, "We do not inherit the earth from our parents, we borrow it from our children." And so when we change the perspective...
That's very meaningful, isn't it?
You.
Yeah, think about that.
Kind of changing that perspective of instead of what is that we get from the world, but more so what we give to the next generations and how we want to leave this place better than when we found it. And so that's sort of a broad view over my environment concept, is that it should be a priority for all of us because we all are affected by this outcome of the environment.
Nathan, I'm a grandmother, and many audience members are grandparents. And I've heard and I've thought that I hope, what is the world going to be like for my little guy? You know, is it going to be is it going to be summers that are 120 degrees and he'll never see snow again? And the climate change is going to affect him how? Unless we start doing more than maybe we're doing. And I know I've heard that from a number of people. Some have said their children don't want to have children because they don't want to bring them into a world where the environment is going to be so noxious.
Right.
It's scary to think about. I think we can fix a lot.
I agree.
So
I don't think there's anything that we can't find solutions for. I think
That's
no matter
a very
what those challenges, I
positive
know
good.
there's some people who might say we're past due, right? There's no hope left. I disagree with that. I know that we do have solutions and we can work together to solve these problems, but we do need to make it a priority and we do need to take the challenges we're facing seriously.
I completely agree with you. I'm going to skip to two things.
Sure.
One is you talked on your website about public funding for fire, police, and EMS. Do you know that's an enormous issue for so many of us, especially after hearing, on the news, defund the police, let's get rid of the police. Tell me your thoughts about funding police, fire, and EMS.
Correct. So I know about 12 years ago, our state pulled municipal funding from the cities, which meant that they had less resources to appropriate to their needs. Because of course we know the needs of Hudson, Stowe, Talmadge, Silver Lake, Monroe Falls, Akron are different than one another. But when they pulled this funding, essentially that was the current Republican legislature and Republican governor, they were trying to have that surplus to be higher. And so basically the cities had to either raise taxes locally or they had to do without. Earlier in 2023, I was speaking to the Fire Chiefs Association of Summit County. And we were going over a leadership module on engagement. And so the premise behind it is it's under emotional intelligence that you might be satisfied in your job, but are you engaged? Are you really invested? And there are three factors. There's psychological meaningfulness, which is a reason to engage, or how motivated you are. Psychological safety, which is your ability to engage without feeling the need to protect yourself. And then psychological availability, which is basically your capacity to engage. And not all, but many of them that were the fire chiefs, different fire officers would tell me is that they said that one of their most disengaging factors was the burnout, the overload, and the lack of resources matching the task demands.
I bet.
Because as their budget get less and less, the 911 calls still come in at the same exact rate.
If not more.
Exactly. And so you're looking at how they get burnt out is because they have less firefighters, less staff, and that leads towards more stress and more burnout. So when I look at what we need to be refocusing is when we have a over $5 billion surplus in our budget.
In our state budget?
In our state budget, over $5 billion last year. And so what that means is that money is not being invested in you. It's not being invested in this community where we might need these resources to go. And so one of my biggest things is that each community has something unique to them that maybe they're prioritized as a focus of theirs. I know in Stowe, they were very adamant that they would love to have a splash pad at Skip Park. In Akron, there's housing issues, and there's a lot of challenges in Akron that greater funding could support. And so Talmadge is looking at having a housing expansion as well. So there are all these different communities, and even Monroe Falls. Oftentimes, Monroe Falls feels overlooked because they go there smaller, and even Silver Lake.
Yes, I would
and they say, we're a community too, but they often get overlooked when it comes down to funding opportunities. And I just think that we need to make sure that every single community, every single person feels represented, and when funding comes in, that funding can go to the unique needs of that community, which kind of further emphasizes the need for diversity because we have diverse needs. And sometimes the best people to make these decisions are the local leaders who are working directly with the constituents on a regular basis because they know the needs best.
Excellent. Excellent thing to hear about. All right, next. We have 5 minutes, so we're going to talk fast. Okay. You had a very frightening statistic on your website. I'm going to put my glasses on and read it. That the Ohio death rate by gun violence is the 24th highest in the nation?
Yes.
Good heavens. And then you heard about yesterday at the parade.
Correct.
For the Super Bowl. what do you want to do? What do you want to do there, Nathan?
Well, I think one of the first things is that we want to make sure that the Second Amendment, we protect that. It's just a well-regulated militia being necessary for the free state.
Yeah.
The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. But the first part there is a well-regulated militia. And that's what we don't have in this state. I almost like to see us as sort of the wild, wild Midwest, where we're all on our own to fend for ourselves, when in reality that's causing great harm to not only our current generation, but even our next generation. And there's a lot of solutions that can be done. Where I've shot guns before. I've shot shotguns and rifles and scouting and so forth. So we know that that's perfect. That's fine. That's perfectly all right.
Right.
But there are nationwide databases that help kind of screen people to see whether they could be harmful to themselves or others, right, through mental health challenges, whether it is with criminal backgrounds. And so there's what's called NICS, which is the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. That's through the FBI. And that's normally regulated for the federal background checks. Whereas in Ohio, they try to avoid expanding these background checks. And so we need to make sure that these universal background checks are more accessible so that we can keep deadly weapons out of the hands of the people who shouldn't have them. And until we enact some sort of reasonable firearm legislation, what essentially we're doing is frightening our children. Even with the schools I work with, when I go into a lot of the Akron public schools, I as well as the students have to go through basically post 9/11 airport security. So imagine growing up every single day, you go to class and you have to go through all this security just to get to algebra class.
Yeah.
And this is where our
and it becomes part of your life, and how traumatizing, frankly.
Right. Because every day you're reminded that you are a threat.
Yeah.
Or the person next to you is a threat.
A threat.
And so that is just where it's disappointing to see our society accept this as the reality we want to go down. And I think where you can look at numerous statistics that 80%, 88%, 94% of people who agree that just adding this extra level.
Yes, I didn't know we didn't have it. I truly didn't
There
know.
is for the federal, like for federal licensors. But about 22% of people who acquire a gun get it through without a background check because they get it through private sales or kind of off the radar, and that's 1 out of 5 people that are able to get a gun without a background check. And so again, it's not that we can't do this, it's that we choose not to. And that's a major problem because just like the Kansas City shooting that happened recently, when you're there to celebrate a Super Bowl,
with your kids,
with your family.
Yep.
You just want to have a good time.
Yep.
You just want to go see the football players, see the parade, celebrate. And many times we just want to go watch a movie. We just want to go and see our friends at school.
Go to a concert.
And we shouldn't have to be living in this state of fear that the next shooting is just around the corner.
But it is.
And it is.
That is probably my biggest concern as I get older, not for me, but for my child and her husband and my grandchild. Nathan, we have 2 minutes left, and I apologize for kind of skipping some of this, but I knew 30 minutes would not be enough. Do you want to say anything directly to our senior population here in Hudson?
Sure, I'd love to. So first of all, thank you so much for your time and for hearing my message here tonight. My name is Nathan Jarosz. You can learn more about this campaign at nathanjarosz.com to see more about who we are and what we're all about. But also the key takeaway is that why I believe I'm the best candidate in this race is because I believe I'm a lifelong servant leader. And what's currently happening with our government needs a change, needing fresh, innovative leadership that's going to ensure that every person has a voice and feels empowered. It's not just going to be through me alone. It's going to be through the best of what is in this community, and I'm very excited to be able to amplify the voice of this community.
Excellent. I'm very glad you were here.
It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. I had a great time.
Thank you. And thank you for watching North of 60. Nathan will have his website information at the very end of this show, so you can write it down and go to his website. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.